Hello, beginning guitarists, and welcome to Guitarsolodojo, the place where you can learn how to play this thing here we call the guitar. This video is not for the advanced player. It is for the person who doesn't even know what a guitar is. Well, maybe you know what a guitar is, but you don't know how any of it works, and we're going to explain a little bit of that today to set you up for your first actual lesson, which you can find in the next video here, which we're going to be part of our white belt series of lessons in the Guitarsolodojo. And don't worry, black belts and masters, we will have plenty of lessons left in that realm as well. But today is all about the beginner, the person just getting started. Now, when you get started, there's a few questions you'll probably ask yourself, or people might tell you, and all these different things. You'll get tons of different information, and maybe depending on what store you go to, they might tell you what to buy, what they want to sell at that particular time. But ultimately, you have to think about a few things. Two main things. First, do I want to start on an acoustic, or do I want to start on electric? Now, I've taught for quite some time, and that's always a point of conversation that I have to have with either parents or the student themselves about which they want to play. And a lot of people would think that, errantly think, by the way, that you have to start on the acoustic if you want to go to the electric guitar. Certainly you can do that, but if your end goal is to play stuff on the electric guitar and you have no real interest in the acoustic guitar, don't start with the acoustic guitar, start with the electric guitar. Because there's a lot of nuance in the electric guitar that you will not find on the acoustic. You bring up the volume, you bring in things like distortion, different sounds to make it sound really cool, effects, and all this good stuff. All that comes into play, and if you do the acoustic first for an extended period of time, especially when you're just sitting on the couch playing unplugged, you can get away with a lot, and you won't hear all the extra noise that the electric will bring on. Number one. Number two, the string tension, unless you do some crazy things on the acoustic and even crazier things on the electric, as far as the string tension goes, you're typically going to have a lot heavier tension on the acoustic guitar than you would on the electric guitar. Now, that in itself isn't a bad thing or anything like that. It requires a lot more effort to press down. But what you don't want to do is get used to pressing really hard here, and then you go to an electric guitar, will end up happening, the strings are so much less difficult to press down, you'll end up playing and sounding out of tune because your left hand is just that strong. You built up too much strength maybe. It's not that it's incurable, because you can get used to it and fix it, but it's just an extra step you don't necessarily want to go through. So once again, if you want to start on the electric, start with the electric. Fundamentally, the instruments are the same. They still have 6 strings, they still have all these things called frets and all these basic ideas. The approach becomes a little bit different on how you play it. So that's number one, what guitar to pick. So hopefully with that little bit of information, you'll at least begin your search of what you want to do. Styles also make a big difference. If you're into rock and roll and you're into Ozzy Osbourne or Eddie Van Halen, this probably isn't the instrument that you want to start with. Anyway, enough about that. So some of the basics. So we'll start with the very beginning. I'll assume you know nothing, even though you do know something, and we all know this. So this is a guitar, and you probably knew that already. I'm going to go over the parts of the guitar in case you don't know that. And so we have the headstock up here, okay? We have these little pegs right there. These are the tuning pegs. That's how you tune your guitar. And there's a lot of resources on how to tune the guitar. I'm not going to cover that today, but you can get one of these cool little clip-on tuners here and clip it on the end of the guitar, and that will greatly assist you. I will, however, tell you like what these strings should be tuned to and that sort of thing. So back to the guitar itself. We have the neck of the guitar, which is just this whole part right here. On this side of the guitar, we have the strings to start with. And you may have counted already, but you should have 6 strings on your standard guitar. And when we count the strings, we don't count from the thick string. In other words, the one up here. This is the thing that people usually do. We count from here. So this would be string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so our 6 strings. On the front side of the neck, we have the fretboard. And each one of these little sections right here will be a fret. Okay, so I should rephrase that actually. We loosely call this whole section a fret. This whole basic section right here is actually part of and is going to give you the basic sound of this first little metal wire right there, which is actually the physical fret. So that's the metal part between these little sections right there. That is actually the fret. And when I press down in this area right here, also known as the first fret, this is going to engage that little metal wire, and I'm going to get that sound to come out. Okay, so these are some of the basic ideas, but we continue on up the fretboard. This would be the first fret, second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on and so on and so on and so on. This particular guitar here, a lot of guitars are very different. An acoustic guitar is very standard, either have the body start at the 12th fret or most of the time at the 14th fret. This one starts at the 12th fret. Most of the time on a steel string, I should say. We also have nylon string guitars, which typically start the body at the 12th fret, but we don't need to get into that or worry about that right now. And then we have these little dots, okay? These little fret markers. They aren't just there for decoration, even though they can be cool decoration. You should have them in the front of the guitar on most guitars, and you also have them on the side of the guitar, right over here, okay, the side of the neck. And they are conveniently marked to help you find quick positioning on the fretboard, okay? So if we see this first dot, typically the first dot is either at the 3rd fret or the 5th fret. Easy to count if you don't know which one it is. And sometimes you'll even see it at the 1st fret, which most people will not have a problem finding the 1st fret. If you do, you might want to put your own little fret marker on there, but I think you'll be okay. So we have the 3rd fret here, and then the 5th fret on the next marker, and then the 7th and the 9th, okay? This is really important. And then you have these 2 dots right here. This isn't universal, so sometimes we have another set of 2 dots maybe at the 7th fret. Don't be fooled, it is not the 12th fret, it is still the 7th fret, okay? Once again, you can count your way up and figure that out. They're just quick reference points, okay? And the double dots are on the 12th fret for a very specific reason, which I'll get into right now, then we'll cover the rest of the guitar. This goes back to sort of the tuning thing. We have the string numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We also have the letter names of the strings. That is what note they are tuned to, okay? And so this 6th string, we'll start from here, is tuned to an E, okay? The next string, the 5th string is tuned to an A. Then the 4th string is tuned to a D. The 3rd is tuned to a G. The 2nd is tuned to a B. And the 1st string is another E. Okay, so we have what's called a low E, low in pitch, not physical orientation, low E and high E. Okay, and then we have all those strings in between. So we have E, A, D, G, B, and E again, okay? So when I have a low E and a high E, for those of you who have never played an instrument and don't know anything about music, which is totally fine, this E is obviously lower in pitch than that E. That's because they're separated by what are called octaves. They're 2 octaves apart in this case. You don't need to understand that. I'll probably say some terminology that you've never heard before, and that's okay. You can either look it up or just know that this exists, and we will cover more of this later as we get deeper into these lessons. But this E right there is played again, well, not that pitch, but the E again is repeated at the 12th fret. And that's typically why that 12th fret is marked with double dots, because that represents sort of the beginning of the neck. So just as when I played the strings open, it was E, A, D, G, B, and E, the 12th fret is also E, A, D, G, B, and E again. So that begins the repeating section of the fretboard, okay? And so what looks like this enormous neck, well, maybe not enormous, but it looks like a lot of stuff going on here, which there can be. Sometimes you have up to 24 frets on your guitar, maybe even more on some guitars made in the 80s. But really, it's just 2 sections of fretboard. The first 12 frets and the next possible 12 frets that you have there. They just sort of repeat the notes that you're playing, only they're an octave apart, okay? So that might seem like a lot of information. Some of it you need right now, some of it you don't need right now, but at least it's floating around there in your brain, okay? And we'll continue with the rest of the guitar here. So the body of the guitar, which is this whole thing right here, okay? So we have the body of the guitar, we have the sides, pretty descriptive, just the sides of the guitar, and the top of the guitar, okay? Otherwise the soundboard or something like that. And we have this big hole right there. That's just where the sound escapes, especially when you're playing just acoustically, you're not plugged in. This one's plugged in, so I can give a nice feed to the video, but a lot of times if you're just playing completely unplugged, we have the volume off. All you get is the volume coming out of that sound hole right there, okay? Back here, this whole piece right there is referred to as the bridge. We have on the bridge, or inserted in the bridge, I guess, it would be a saddle piece, this white piece right there, and that's where the strings are actually resting on. And then we have string pins, in this case, which are holding down the strings in place, essentially, okay? We don't need to worry about how they're working, just know that they are there. When you get to changing strings, then you can worry about that. Now, obviously, on electric guitar, well, maybe not obviously, I should say, on electric guitar, it can look very, very different, okay? But fundamentally, electric guitar still has a bridge. It just looks different. You won't have these string pins on an electric guitar. You'll have all sorts of variations on how the strings are held in place for an electric, but we can cover that maybe in another video. But once again, the instruments are fundamentally the same. Now, there's some other little things that we've got a pick guard right there. Once again, pretty descriptive. It guards the body of the guitar from the pick. Most of the time with modern finishes, it's not such a big issue where this finish is going to wear through and get down to the bare wood. But if you have a matte finish on a guitar or just an oil finish on the guitar, it might come in handy. It might be very useful for that. It could eventually begin to look like Willie Nelson's guitar if you've ever seen that with big holes in it from just years and years and years of playing. But anyway, so those are the basics of the guitar itself. Okay, so how to get started from there? Just some basic things that you must know if you want to continue on. Well, you don't have to know, I guess. You could kind of just weed your way through all this stuff and just try to figure it out, but you'll probably want to use this information. So if you're playing guitar right-handed, like most people are, and actually that brings up a good question here that I always get. What if I'm left-handed? Do I still use a right-handed guitar? Well, my philosophy is guitar should be no different really than the piano in that sense. So when I look at a piano, there's no right and left-handed pianos. There's just your left hand hits low keys and your right hand hits high keys, but we don't switch that around if you're left-handed. Both hands have to do something anyway. Now, that same idea on the guitar, I would highly recommend playing guitar strung for right-handed players because even if you're left-handed, because both hands have to do something anyway. And your left hand will get used to pressing down the notes and your right hand will get used to picking. But the big advantage here is that there are a lot more right-handed guitars available and they're usually less expensive than the left-handed guitars. Now, if you're absolutely fundamentally opposed to using a right-handed guitarist as a left-handed person, that's fine. Get your left-handed guitar. Everything that we're saying here will just be kind of reversed, okay? So for me, I'm playing right-handed, so my left hand is going to do the work over here pressing down the strings. On the left hand, we have, of course, our thumb, which will come and play later when we're playing some Jimi Hendrix, maybe. But then we have the basic left-hand fingering, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have our first finger and our fourth finger and our international symbol of rock and roll. Don't forget that, extremely important. And we have all the other ones in between, okay? So sometimes it's very, very important to designate which finger you're going to use to hold down a note, not because it makes the note sound different. The note will sound the same, but it's all about efficiency and how you're going to get to maybe the next note, okay? So keep that in mind as you look at that. And that'll bring me to how to hold down a note on the guitar. There's a couple things that immediately you want to be aware of. And as you go through this whole process of learning how to play the guitar, there's always one more little thing, always one more little nuance. So all the things that I tell you today aren't necessarily the be-all, end-all, and that's it. You learn this and you're good to go. No, you refine the technique, of course, just like anything else that has a certain amount of complexity to it, which guitar certainly does. You'll find that once you get beyond this beginning phase, there's other little things and other little exceptions to the rules and things like that. So we're going to start with the most fundamental idea, though, and just to make good, clean sounding notes, okay? So I'm going to take my first finger and I'm going to hold down the first fret on the first string, okay? So we think about, well, here's the first string, okay? And remember, this was the first fret, second fret, third. I'm just going to go for the first fret, okay? Now, one thing I want you to look at is I don't want to be on this side of the fret, okay? And so this is the nut, which we can also call the 0 fret. But if I'm trying to hold down the first fret, I don't want to be close to the 0 fret. I want to be close up to that first fret wire, that is that metal part dividing the frets, but not on top of it, okay? And I also want to use my fingertip, okay? So I don't want to flatten out my finger and use that part of the finger to hold down the note. Even if I'm using more of the fingertip, I still don't want to flatten it out like this. Once again, it won't make the note sound bad necessarily. Just later on, it's going to limit what you're able to do. And it's going to cause other problems. You can always choose to flatten out your finger in certain situations, but it's much more difficult to get used to keeping this knuckle arched and keeping this fingertip on the string. And so that's what you want to start with, okay? And the reason being for staying close up to the fret is it's just the easiest place to get a good tone. So if I press down with a certain amount of pressure, okay, I'll press it as soft as I can and still get a sound. Now if I keep that same pressure and I slide it back towards a different part of the fret, obviously I get that sound. And so a lot of you, when you first pick up the guitar and hold down a note, this is what you're going to hear. Now, just because you move close up to the fret wire doesn't mean it's magically going to sound good. You still have to press with a certain amount of pressure to get that note to sound out. And if you are starting on an acoustic guitar, that could require a significant amount of tension. So do not be surprised when the fingertips start to hurt. That's also why I highly suggest people don't go into this necessarily gung-ho in terms of how you're going to start practicing. So you don't want to say, I've never touched a guitar before, but I'm really excited, so I want to play this for 3 hours today. Well, after about 3 hours and never touching the guitar, you might have blood blisters on your fingertips. We don't want that, obviously. So maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes is probably enough of actual solid playing time. And your fingertips will probably tell you, please stop, I've had enough. So anyway, you can start to work on that. But as we move this up, we can just move up to different frets, keeping fundamentally the same idea of staying close up to this metal wire without being on top of it. And of course, that concept stays totally true, completely the same when I shift to other strings. So if I go to string number 6, hold down the 3rd fret, 1, 2, 3, and I get really low on that fret, meaning closer to that 2nd fret, very likely it's going to sound like that. Okay, as I move up closer, I'm trying not to change the tension, so I give you a very fair idea of what it's going to sound like. So I'm barely using any tension on this, just the bare minimum. As I slide that back, it's going to sound really bad. Now, I could get it to sound okay by pressing a little bit harder right here. We're just not trying to make it any more difficult than we have to, okay? And then there's always exceptions to that. Sometimes when I hold down a chord, sometimes the fingers have to shift over a little bit. And so I could probably read in the comments, well, what about this? What about this? There are a lot of what abouts. So, and I get it. Don't worry about it. For now, just start with this, okay? Next, very important. What are we going to do? Are we going to use a pick? Are we going to use our fingers? Okay, so if I decide I want a finger pick, it's going to put me in a certain style of music, most likely. Now, like you can take some great guitarists like Mark Knopfler, Jeff Beck, and things like that, who didn't really use a pick at all that I'm aware of, that were playing electric guitars and sounded great. And that's really cool. It's just not diverse enough for most things that you'll end up wanting to do. If that's all you want to play, that's cool. I would never knock that because obviously that's a preference thing. However, if you get used to using the pick for electric guitar, it's very, very versatile. Now, if you don't want to use a pick at all because you say you want a finger style and do things like this, or maybe whatever it may be, you might just choose that style of music, and that's totally fine. You don't have to use a pick at all. Okay, so as far as the finger picking goes, I'm not going to go deep into that today because it's not the easiest way to start. I'll probably have a separate video just for finger picking. So I'm going to reserve today for how to use the pick, okay? And even if you want to mainly finger pick or the pick doesn't feel comfortable in your hand, it doesn't feel comfortable in anybody's hand in the beginning. It's a foreign object that you're trying to hang on to and use as a tool, basically, right? So don't be surprised by that and don't be put off by that. It just takes a little bit of a time to get used to. So even if you do want to use finger picking, at least try the pick because it can open up a lot of other doors for you when you're trying to do other types of music. And it is a big adjustment to get used to if you're only used to using your fingers because you have, like I said, a foreign object in your hand. So how to hang on to the pick. There are variations to this. There's no exact way. One of my favorite players, if not my favorite player ever, well, we'll just say my favorite player ever, Eddie Van Halen, hangs onto the pick in a way I wouldn't teach people, or used to hang onto the pick in the way I wouldn't teach people how to hang onto the pick. Does that mean he was doing it wrong? No. Obviously. He did it perfect for what he was doing. He had a very unorthodox way of playing the guitar. And not very unorthodox, just, certain things that he did were definitely unorthodox, and hanging onto the pick was one of them. But I'm going to show you more of a very standardized method of hanging onto the pick and one that will allow you some versatility. So we're going to start by holding up the pick. You're going to use it in the right hand when you're playing the guitar, but we're going to start by hanging onto it with the left hand, right by the very point. Now, picks come in all sorts of different shapes, thicknesses, sizes, and all that stuff. I use a fairly thin pick these days because I found I can make it, use it for lots of different things, and it doesn't get in the way for whatever style I'm going to go for. But you're going to have to experiment. Okay, this is a pretty standard pick size, but they have really small teardrop-looking picks, and they have larger triangular-looking picks, and then there's the thickness things. Toy around with it. Buy a few, and start with maybe a really standardized size and shape like this, and just experiment with different thicknesses. See which one feels good. There's no be-all end-all for anybody. There's no specific answer. You have to try it out and try different things, and you will probably change over time. I have gone through I don't know how many different types of materials and different thicknesses and different shapes of picks over the years, and it's kind of fun to experiment around and try and see which one each is good for. Today, how to hang onto the pick. We're going to hang right by that little pointy part, okay? And then we're going to take our right thumb. We're going to go straight across the pick like this, okay? We're going to form a nice T. I want that pick to be basically perpendicular with my thumb, okay? So I don't want it drifting that way or that way. I want it just like that, okay? And then I'm going to go on the other side of that pick using my index finger, and only the index finger. That means I don't want the middle finger to help, or any of the other fingers for that matter. But usually people want to also grab it with the middle finger. Let's not do that. So we're going to grab it just with the index finger, okay? And I will curl that index finger in just a little bit. So I'm not going to have it pointed out that way. I'm definitely not going to have it curled in that far. Although you will see certain books and certain players when they curl it in like that, and they do just fine. It's just not what I would recommend at this stage of the game. So I would say let's just kind of have that pick, and the index finger should be contained within the pick, okay? So don't let it drift off there or outside the boundaries of that pick. And once again, I'm curling again just a little bit. And if you notice, maybe we can zoom in here, post-production here, and see that I only have very little bit of the pick sticking out of my thumb and my index finger, okay? That's because the thickest string is only like that thick. So I don't need to have that much of the pick hanging out, just a very little bit. And if you're playing very accurately, you shouldn't need any more than that anyway, okay? So just a little bit of that pick. And also you notice the tip of my index finger and the edge of my thumb are equidistant from the tip of the pick. Okay, so I don't want the thumb way out this way or vice versa. I want them both basically the same distance from the tip of the pick. There could be a little bit of variation, and that's okay. So that's how we're going to start. Okay, basic hand position, right hand position, and how to utilize that pick. There are no absolutes in this either. There's lots of different ways you can do this. I will teach you 2 essential ways right now. And one, and this is a very good way to get used to using the pick and getting used to putting your hand in a good position and actually getting comfortable with just hitting the strings. You can take your hand, take that pinky side of the hand right here, and just rest it, in this case on the acoustic guitar, but an electric guitar will be the same idea, on these string pins right there. As if you have just karate chopped your bridge. Do not karate chop your bridge. That'll hurt you or the guitar or both, and none of those options are good. So we just want to have that just resting right here, okay? And I'm not going to press really hard. I'm just going to make contact. But what this does is this gives you a point of reference for your right hand, okay? And so the idea is that if I were to be writing something on a desk, okay, and I'm writing something very, very small and I need to be very precise with it, I won't be hanging on to a pencil by the eraser to do that, right? Because I don't have very much control, and I certainly won't just be free floating around. I'll be close up to the tip of the pencil, just like I am close up to the tip of the pick, and I'll have my hand resting on the desk, because that'll give me a good reference point and help me control what's going on. Well, the same idea fundamentally works when you're trying to aim for individual strings. Now, once again, I got to say this again, because I know people are going to reject this, but we don't have to have it here, and this isn't the only way. This is just a good way to get used to, because this is also a technique of having this hand rest right here, and I'm only situating the guitar like this so you can see it. And having the hand resting right here is one way to help you gauge where the strings are at, but it's also utilized in the various techniques later on. So I'm going to put the guitar back up. We have our hand right there, and we're just going to practice hitting the strings, okay? So I'm going to start with string number 1, just using the very tip of the pick, and I'm going to pick down through the string towards the ground. And because I'm picking down towards the ground, we call that a downstroke, okay? So we got a downstroke. Okay, and I can keep on doing downstrokes. But then I want to mix in the other direction, the upstroke, okay? And so we're going to pick up towards the ceiling, right? So we got down towards the ground and up towards the ceiling, all right? So we're just going to practice. Now, a few things you might notice as you're working on this. If your right hand drifts a little bit this way, you'll get what's called a palm mute. Okay? Now, palm mute isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's used in lots of music, like so you'll hear that technique used a lot, especially in rock music. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not always a thing you want to do. So if you hear it and you don't want to like that sound, just slide your right hand back a little bit. Doesn't take much. You just have to be behind that saddle piece, okay? And as I'm playing string number 6, it's okay to have the side of my hand touching these other strings. In fact, it can be a big help to keep those strings from ringing out when I don't want them to ring out. So I'm going to have my hand right here. I just slide it back a little bit. Okay, and I'm picking string number 6. And so I'm going back and forth between downstrokes, upstrokes, alternating between downstrokes and upstrokes, hence the term alternate picking, okay? So this is your first exercise that you can work on before you really know how to play anything on the guitar. It's just an alternate picking exercise, okay? And I would usually call it the 6-minute drill. And if you didn't guess, it'll take about 6 minutes, okay? So what we're gonna do is spend about a minute on each string, just alternate picking. Okay, just down, up, down, up, down, up. Now, just as we don't need very much of that pick sticking out because the strings aren't very thick, the same idea goes that when I go to pick the string, because the string's not very thick, I don't need to swing the pick very far, okay? So once again, that string's only like that thick, so if I'm swinging the pick even that far, it's a big waste of energy. It takes me a lot longer to get there, and it's just gonna be a lot more sloppy, okay? So I just wanna take a nice small motion, and if you're finding yourself sort of slingshotting past the string, you're probably digging in a little too hard. You might be sinking the pick in a little too far, things like that. But the idea is we just want to stay relaxed and just try to keep it nice and smooth, okay? If you start to speed up and you're getting stuck on the strings, totally normal. Just slow it back down again until you can control it, okay? And what you'll find is that on the guitar, much like any other instrument, for me, speed is a lot like just putting the ball at the top of a hill and just letting it roll. You don't have to do anything from that point on. It'll get faster and faster and faster. So the more you repeat something over and over and over again, you don't have to worry about trying to make it go faster until you're like going, really, really crazy fast. Then you have to do exercise to help you get faster at it. But especially in this beginning phase, you just keep on repeating. It'll naturally get faster and faster at a much more organic way, or in a much more organic way, so that you're not forcing the issue and it's still gonna sound good. So we're gonna play this string for about a minute. We'll just switch to the next string. Obviously, I'm not playing each one for a minute, but just spend about a minute or so. It's not like if you play 59 seconds, the guitar is going to blow up. It's just a good approximation of how long you can just use to warm up, okay? One other thing about this exercise. When I'm doing this, and I'm switching strings and gradually getting to this high E string, or the string number 1, I don't want to just twist my hand and leave my hand resting up here and try to pick like this. That puts me in a really bad position to try to play this string. If I keep it like this, now all of a sudden I'm picking side to side, which I don't want, or I have to put my hand in a really uncomfortable position to play that string straight across. Which brings me to my next point about hanging onto the pick. We don't want to twist the pick too much, okay? When you're picking it, you'll sound like this. So if you hear that scratchy sound, you're probably twisting the pick a lot too much. You can twist it a little bit, maybe like 10 degrees or something like that, and it'll still sound just fine, but you don't want to twist it too much to get that sort of sound. You will not hear that sound here, but what you'll lose is a lot of the percussiveness of the attack when you pick side to side like that, okay? So once again, you're not just going to twist the hand, you're going to gradually lower it down when you get to this string, and that'll keep that pick at a nice similar angle all the way through each string, okay? So very consistent that way. So that's just a really good way to warm up on the right hand. So next way, and this is going to go a little bit beyond where you probably know at this point, if this is truly the very beginning for you, but let's say you know a chord already, okay? So if you've already learned a chord, say you've learned a very common chord, which is an E minor, okay? And you want to strum that chord. So when we're strumming, no longer are we going to keep our hand resting on this bridge, okay? Because this doesn't afford us the ability to do that. We are just going to take our hand off, and we're going to relax it and start strumming. And we'll get into how that works. So what we don't want to do is play back here unless you're going for a very, very specific sound. But there's definitely a tonal difference between picking here and picking here. And a lot of that is based on your preference. If you like this really twangy sound, well, you're welcome to play back there, but it's usually not the greatest tone for most songs. So generally speaking, somewhere in that sound hole area is good, but that means you're going to bring your hand out here. So you're not going to rest your hand on the strings anymore, because instead of just getting a regular palm muty sound, it's just going to be completely muted now, where we don't hear anything except for percussion, okay? And we don't want that either. So we're going to take our hand off the guitar, and we're going to just, I like to think of it as throwing the pick through the strings, okay? Now you'll see a lot of variations on how to strum. Some people will use their fingers. All sorts of variations, or the finger picking like we talked about before. We're going to just do a really, really straightforward, universally used strumming method, okay? One of the very, very important things about strumming in the beginning is just the mechanics of it, okay? And not getting hung up on the strings, not digging in too hard, and not using more than you actually need to use as far as your arm goes to get a good strumming sound. So number one, we're going to start, let's assume you don't know any chords right now, okay? So we're just going to take our left hand, I'm going to take all 4 fingers and just lightly touch all 6 strings, okay? If I press on the strings, I'm going to hear that. I don't want to hear that. I just want to hear this. So I'm just barely, barely touching, okay? And I say all 4 fingers because if I only use 1 finger, I might hear something like that, which is called a harmonic. I don't want that. I just want to barely touch so I get a nice percussive sound. So now, let's work on that actual strumming. So part of this is just keeping your hand really, really relaxed. And when you hang onto the pick the correct way, you can stay relaxed and still get a nice firm grip on that pick. Okay, you don't have to squeeze the life out of it to get it nice and snug in your hand and have it stay there. Okay, so what we are going to do is practice the motion of strumming by just thinking about shaking something off of your hand. Say you have water on your hand, or you just smashed your hand in the door, or whatever it is. Okay, the first instinct is to kind of go like this, okay? And the reason you do this is because it creates the most velocity and the easiest way on this part of your hand, the extremities here, okay? So we can create a lot of velocity by just rotating the wrist and doing this, okay? And so the reason we do this is because it creates a radius versus just keeping your hand straight like this. If I keep my hand straight like this and rotate my wrist, I don't get much of a radius on these extremities, okay, which is where we're going to be hanging onto the pick. So imagine I'm hanging onto the pick, or don't imagine, I'll just hang onto the pick. So I'm hanging onto the pick now, and I'm twisting my wrist, but I don't have much of a distance I can cover with this pick because I'm not creating a radius between the tip of the pick and my wrist. So what I'm going to do is let this just kind of relax and bend that way a little bit. Now when I do the same exact motion on the wrist, now I can cover a lot more ground, meaning I can cover all 6 strings if I want to. Okay, so, and once again, I'll say this over and over again, you will see lots of variations on this. I'm not saying everybody else is wrong and I'm right. I know this is a very effective way to do it, so this is what I'm showing you now. And you'll see lots of great guitarists using this basic method. Lots of great guitarists using other methods too. But anyway, so here we go. So we're just going to practice by twisting that wrist and just not even hitting any strings yet. Just kind of just get used to doing this, okay? This is kind of the motion. When we strum, we're trying to think of the strings at this point as one big thick string. So I'm not trying to go, okay? I'm trying to think of it as one big string. Okay? Same thing on the way up. So I can go upstroke, downstroke. And as I do this, there's a natural arc motion to the pick. So the pick doesn't go completely straight down and completely straight up when you do this. That's okay. Okay? If I'm doing a downstroke and I only hit these 4 strings, it's all right. It's not going to sound bad. I'm just not necessarily hitting those strings. And when you see music a lot of times, you'll see like the music written to where these 4 strings are hit, maybe these 3 strings and these 3 and then these 4 and things like that. That's not necessarily because whoever was playing it was trying to hit those specific things. It's more indicative or more indicates what direction they were picking. So if I only see these 4 strings, it might have been a downstroke. If I see these 4 strings, it might have been an upstroke. Number 1, stay relaxed. Okay, so we'll go back to our mute. Just practice going like this. all this looks pretty easy, and once you practice it enough, it will be easy, but it's not easy in the beginning, okay? And it's especially not easy to have good technique because the tendency is to do all sorts of things that are intuitive. And most things about this instrument, like physically, are not intuitive. They're just not what our hands were really born to do. We can definitely train them to do it, but if it doesn't feel right and you're like, oh, this pick feels all wrong in my hand, I get it. It's totally normal. Let it feel wrong in your hand, but you will get used to it, okay? So this idea, just throwing the pick through the strings and letting that hand relax, okay? Really, really helpful. And then we can practice going down, up. No need to go fast, just nice and easy, but nice and relaxed, okay? What I want you to try to avoid doing is taking your whole arm and doing this, okay? Now, I do see lots of players doing that. It's exhausting, okay? And you'll probably end up with tendonitis in your elbow. Well, you might think it's tennis elbow, but it's guitar elbow. I don't know. But this way, you're moving a lot less mass, right? You're just twisting your hand instead of moving your entire arm. And so because of that, you can develop a lot more speed and just stay a lot more relaxed. You're not going to have to force it so much, okay? So... And you can pick pretty quickly without putting a lot of effort into it. You could stay completely relaxed. So those are some really, really basic concepts, but I will show you one more thing, okay? If you're really ambitious, you can start this. So we go back to our 4 fingers. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So here's an exercise before you know any music that you can do. It's not going to be easy necessarily, but at least you can comprehend it and go for it, okay? And there will be mistakes made, probably, but that's okay. Just get the thing going, and you can always work things out. So we're going to take all 4 fingers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and assign them to a 4 fret section of the fretboard. In this case, I'll start from the 5th fret, so I'm looking for that second dot, which is right there. So I'm going to put my on the 5th fret of string number 6, or the low E string, okay? And I'm just going to line up my 2nd finger on the 6th fret, my 3rd finger on the 7th fret, and my pinky on the 8th fret. Now, if you find you can't make that stretch, there's a few things that you're probably unaware of that you might want to fix, and it's usually about hand and wrist position on the left hand, okay? And so we'll go over that really quick. Basically, the rule is if I'm sitting across from you, and I can see your thumb dangling over here, it's not necessarily a bad thing until you're trying to make a stretch. If you're trying to make a stretch, and say I'm going to stretch from the 3rd fret, and I want to stretch the highest fret I can reach with my pinky. My pinky, unless I snap it, and I definitely don't want to snap it, is not going to go past that point. Okay, it's not an exaggeration. My pinky just will not go. So if I get my thumb and wrist in good position, I can pretty easily stretch up to the 8th fret, so 3 to 8. It's all about positioning, okay? This is not comfortable for most people in the beginning, so we don't have to worry about going for this massive stretch, but we do need to pay attention, though, is where's my thumb at on the back of the neck? And not necessarily because the thumb's the be-all, end-all, you know, as far as gauging your technique. It's more about, it's a good indicator about how your wrist is looking, okay? So if I set the guitar like this for a second, and you see my thumb up there, I can lower my thumb there, and nothing changes. The idea is I want to pull my wrist down a little bit, and then my thumb's going to have to follow it, okay? And that means my thumb is just following my wrist, and so that's a good indicator that I'm actually in a little bit better position to make the stretch. There's a lot to this, and this is very, very difficult to teach if we're not being interactive. So if you can't figure this out, that's okay. Don't force the issue. Don't try to force yourself to make a stretch if it's not happening. It's usually a technique thing. It's usually not a hand size thing, okay? Usually... it's rarely an issue of, oh, my hands are too small. People with small hands usually have plenty of stretch to play anything you need to play on the guitar, okay? So it's not almost never the problem, okay? It's almost always about the hand position and the wrist position and things like that. So I'm going to keep my hand here, and if you can manage to line these 4 notes up, great, okay? And we'll address some of those other issues later. But I'm going to line up these 4 frets. I'm not going to need to press them down right now, but I have them all lined up, 5, 6, 7, and 8, using 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th fingers. And I'm just going to play, take these 3 fingers off, take 2, 3, and 4 off, and just play that 1st finger on the 5th fret. Easy enough, right? And then I'm just going to play the 6th fret with the 2nd finger, and the 7th fret with the 3rd finger, and the 8th fret with the pinky or the 4th finger. Okay, so recap. Now if you look at my right hand, You notice I'm going down, up, down, up. You don't need to work on that yet. We're just trying to get that left hand to press down notes. So if you're so inclined and you're so inspired, feel free to go ahead and go down, up, but it's not required right at this moment. We just want to get things moving, okay? So we're going to go 5, 6, 7, 8. Then we'll go to the next string, string number 5, the A string, and do the same thing. And then continue on up. Then I'm going to reverse it. And now when I say reverse it, this is something that always comes up. We're not meaning, we're not saying 5, 6, 7, 8 just in descending order now. We're going to go 8, 7, 6, 5. Okay? Now if that starts to feel pretty comfortable, you want to test out your stretch, you can move it down a fret. Because in case you didn't notice, the frets get a little wider as you work your way that way. So that being said, you don't need to do that. You can move it up if the stretch is too much. And if you move it up to the 9th fret, say, the fingers hardly have to stretch at all and make it a little bit easier for you. And that's good. Like I said, all we're worried about right this moment is getting those fingers on the strings and maybe allow your fingertips to toughen up just a little bit. Maybe you can get a little callus on there. So if you have any more questions about this, please leave them in the comments section. I'm going to be posting a bunch of videos for beginning guitarists as well as my normal videos that I do, maybe for black belts and masters and things like that. But for now, we're just going to start with that. I hope you enjoy, and I hope that helps.